Welcome everyone to day 3 of the New Leaders Academy series. We are so glad you're back. And today we're going to talk about needs assessments and intentional activity design. We're going to get into the bit and grit of everyday programming. And so welcome for those of you who may not have joined us over the last 2 days. My name is Hillary Jones. I am one of the senior TA liaisons here with the 21st CCLC NTAC, which I have learned from some of you over the last 2 days means my role is to work with the state leaders to help determine what kind of supports we can provide. And with me again is Brittany Stanton, one of our TA liaisons, and her job is to support all of you who are running programs. So Brittany, do you want to add anything to our introductions or share a little bit about yourself today?
Sure. I mean, I definitely have been in your shoes, folks. And today's is kind of the best session of the 3, right? Because we get to the fun stuff. So we're excited to talk to you about that today. And yes, please chime in the chat, introduce yourselves, let us know where you're from. We love to hear from you.
Absolutely. So we do love to hear from you and we love to answer your questions. So feel free to either drop those in the chat or in the Q&A box as we go through our series and our session today. We want to make sure that you get as many of your questions as possible answered. We also will encourage you to join our community of practice because this is not the last time we hope that we're together. We do hope that you join and have conversations, ongoing conversations with other new leaders throughout this series. But that said, for those of you who are kind of in the just joining us for this series or the last day, we want you to know that the 21st CCLC National Technical Assistance Center is here to provide resources for you, the professionals who are leading the work around 21st CCLC, so that you can better engage your young people, better empower families, and really build lasting success for all of the learners that you support. And we do this through webinars such as this one, but really by providing best practices, evidence-based resources, and professional learning opportunities for you. Our focus, our priorities really lie around things like addressing the impacts of COVID-19, around providing equity of access to resources. We want to support students' social, emotional learning needs. And we have a variety of academic focus areas that we address, and we're going to really dive into those today, but we'll also support in areas around programmatic requirements, around fiscal compliance. We are here to be a resource for all of you. And so, as I said, we're going to dig into the needs assessment and intentional activity design, but really you should see this as a through line that we started by talking about the legislation and guidance that informs your 21st CCLC programs. We talked about the management skills that many of you will need to pick up all of the pieces to keep moving through your program. And then we're talking today about needs assessment, about intentional activity design. So we're going to start with a quick check-in for today. And we want to hear from you. How are you? How are you checking into our session today? Are you happy, sad, worried, annoyed, excited? So we've got a little poll just popped up on your screen. Let us know. How are you feeling?
And the poll's anonymous, so don't be
Yeah.
shy. It's okay to be honest.
A little stressed? Are you a little stressed from your taking on this new work? We hope not too stressed. We're still pulling in some answers, but I will tell you this, 69% of you are happy to be here, and we are happy to have you here. We are glad you're jumping into this conversation. We're seeing a little bit of worried. That's fair. You've got a lot on your plate. And that doesn't even account for the things that go on in our personal lives outside of work. Some of you are saying, yeah, I'm excited. We're like jumping right in, and a couple a little low on the annoyed. So that's fair. All of that's fair. But here's my real question for you. My real question for you is this. What is it that you can learn from doing an activity like this with your staff, with your students? How can we benefit from this? So let us know in the chat. Why do we do activities like this? What's
Hillary, I loved doing these things whenever I was working directly with students. And there was all kinds of different ones that you can do, right? Like the emoji one is super cool. Kids like emojis. I also did like the red light, green light, yellow light. How are you feeling? Green is good, red, not good. And it just was, it made such a difference to check in with the students from the get-go. It kind of like set the tone. And even in the depths of the pandemic, when we were doing things virtually, like we always started with that kind of check-in because it felt just so increasingly important during that dark time to be able to make those connections. But when we returned in person, we kept doing them because we saw the value.
Yeah, Brittany, my high school kids loved what's your personal playlist? Like what's going on in your head and how is your music that you're listening to or the song that you've got on repeat in your brain telling us, or what can it tell us about how you're feeling, how you're experiencing the world? My high school kids love that one. And it's not just about your young people, it's about your staff too, right? It's just checking in, hey, how are you today? It can be more formal than that. It can be give us on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you feeling and what can we do to make you a 10 or move you towards that 10, right? It can be little things, but the reality is that those practices of checking in are things that build relationships with our staff, with our students. It can influence how you're able to have conversations. It can tell you things about what happened during the school day. It's really, like Emily says, it's how you're showing up and how we're showing up for our young people. And so it's really important to just start in that place where we're prepared. And that really leads us into what we're going to talk about today, because having all of the activities that you are going to plan and are already planning for your young people, they're important, but the relationships through which we use to do them are equally as important. So during our time together today, we're going to take some time to talk about what it means to intentionally design activities for our program, because we can do a lot of fun things, but our 21st CCLC programs are not meant to be just roll out the ball and get out the Legos programs. They're meant to be much more intentional than that to support the goals that we've been talking about all week. And so as we talk about this today, you're going to see the following through line. And the through line really is data. And you may be sick of hearing us talk about data, but it really should be the through line of what we do today. And we're going to show you how to make it come together. And so our agenda for the day today is that we're going to talk about the levels of data that you need to collect. And we talked a little bit about that on Tuesday, but we're going to dig into that some more, and then how that data informs our needs statements, what our young people really need, what our families really need from our programs, and how those needs then inform our goals for our programs and our decisions about what we do in our activities. Because from that, not just should our program have goals, but our activity should have goals too. And that when we have clear goals for our activities, then we're prepared to really engage students in our program, to really recruit students for our program, to really move forward in that journey. So you'll see this through line come along again, but I'm giving you the little preview of what you can expect today. But we're going to start with the levels of data. So when we talk about levels of data, what we really mean is that there's 3 types of data. And to successfully support each student's learning in our program, we really need to understand these types of data, these levels of data, and we need to collect it. We need to make sure that we have it. And for many of us, data is really an intimidating thing. It can be an intimidating word. It can seem, for some who are new to 21st CCLC, out of place in conversations around out of school time. But our hope is that today you see how it's not, right? And you see how it's intentional. And so levels of data, we're going to think about it in 3 levels, right? And that first level is school level data. This is data that you can find very readily. It's data that's going to be mostly relatively available for you. So you may be able to find from your school, campus, or district a little bit of information around how they're performing on state assessments. Or you can find reports around student attendance, right? That's information that's publicly available. You may even be able to see information around youth crime in your community, right? Those are all the types of things that you can see. They're big picture information. It'll tell you where the challenges are overall, but it doesn't give you that more specific information. That's student level data. This is information that's specific to the students who are in your program. It's information that's specific to your specific school, specific communities, right? It's going to vary from site to site. And this student level data is what you're going to focus on when you're designing activities. It's how you ensure that the activities that you're planning have the greatest impact. And that's what we want to be doing, right? And so this is information that's derived from teachers, from curriculum, from subject matter leaders. We'll talk a little bit more about each of these, but it's generally going to be specific to grade, to school, right? And it's important. The last level of data, and last but not least level of data, indicates what your students want to do. It's their voice data, right? Because we need to be hearing from our students and from our families about what's important to them, what keeps them coming to your program, what is fun, what's relevant for them. And sometimes it's easy to get lost in one of these levels of data and not consider the others. And really, a well-formed activity takes all 3 levels of data in hand and says, this is how we're going to move forward. And so even though there's a wide variety of sources of data we can look at when we're planning our 21st CCLC program, and these are often based on our state, on our school, on our programs, we need to make sure that we're also looking broadly in our communities and saying to ourselves, are there certain student populations who are not mastering content in certain areas? How are we engaging them? How are we making sure that our resources are equitable, that they're being covered across the board? Are we looking at data around safety needs, around social emotional needs, around all kinds of pieces and parts, so that we have the full picture about what our young people in our programs and what our families need from the data? So let's look at each of these and some examples of them. The first is school level data. So state assessments is the most evident one, is kind of the one that people come back to over and over again. Attendance, student behavior, the school performance, the performance of the schools that you're working on, because in many of our schools, we'll see school report cards. In many of our states, I mean, we'll see school report cards that say, this is how this school's doing. Content around school climate, school safety, right? All of this data around what's happening in the schools we're serving. And you may say, I'm not a school, I'm a program, right? I'm a program run by a community-based organization, but you need to know what the students in your program need, and they go to a school. So that's why we're looking at that school level data, right? I mentioned the state report cards, and these are report cards for specific states, for your specific school, that say, this is what's happening. You can look at this school level data, and you can look at the data for your school that you're working with. So if you're not a school yourself, this is one of the places that you want to start your looking. You may also need to look at the different school level data around school report cards. So in most states, you can find school level data reports around how students are doing on reading or mathematics. And you can see charts that look very much like these, where you see whether students are proficient or not in a specific content area. And since our GEPRAs, we talked about those on day 1, look at those measurements, we need to be looking at them too, right? We need to see whether the things that we're measuring, how we're doing to begin with. And so this graphic shows reading scores over a period of time, but we would want to see these for both literacy and math skills. So an example of school level data that we're going to look at for today may say something like this. Only 40% of students meet the grade level standards on the state reading assessments. And we have taken the data that we've seen and we've turned it into a needs statement. We're saying this is the challenge that our students are facing at a school level, that they're not meeting grade level standards. And we know that it's important for our students to read on grade level, right? If they're going to be successful over time, we'll have to dig into that. And so digging into that looks like looking at the student level data. So some examples of student level data that provide us clues into what might be keeping students from meeting their reading goals, right? Or whatever the goal is that you're looking at. We need to dig into that. It's not just our students can't read, because I'm not going to go back to the beginning with your fifth graders and teach them the letters of the alphabet and assume it's my job as the 21st CCLC program to teach them to read from the ground up, right? That's why they go to school. But there is some gap that is making it so that they're not reaching the goals that we have for them. And so that's why we dig into that student level data. And so some examples of that are deeper dives into state assessments. We want to look at their attendance. Are they coming to school? Because it's really hard to learn if they're not coming to school. It's their behavior, right? Are they disruptive all the time into school? And so then they're not in class because they're in the dean's office or the principal's office or whoever's in charge of that, right? Are we looking at their report cards? Are we digging into what they're struggling with? Are we looking at progress monitoring? So many of our schools have some kind of system that they're using now to track individual pieces of what it means to read, right? Or individual pieces of what it means to be successful at math. And they can pull up reports and say, our students don't know how to rhyme words, or our students don't know how to comprehend nonfiction text. They can tell you things like that from progress monitoring that they're doing with their students. And then there's teacher reports. This can be things like teachers saying, hey, my students are struggling with this, that, and the third thing, right? But that student level data allows you to design projects and activities that maximize the impact. It helps you determine why to address a particular topic or skill. And so that student level data is really what you're going to need to focus on when you're designing your activities. It'll make sure you have the greatest impact from what you're doing. So besides student report cards that only come, 3 or 4 times a year, depending on your district, whether you use quarters or trimesters or whatever it is, one thing that we highly recommend you do is you check in with teachers to see what their students need to focus on a little more. So in this example, we've got a handful of teachers that we've checked in with. And one of the things that was asked is, what skills do your students need to master within reading that would strengthen the possibility that they meet the standard on the state assessment? And most of your teachers in your schools are going to have an answer to that question. Right? They're going to know this is the thing because they're looking at that progress monitoring. They're looking at those things. And so we asked these teachers, they listed a variety of things from characterization to sequencing of events to factor opinion or plot, right? You see these things. And they also were asked to rank them on a priority level. Like, what are your low, medium, high priorities for your students? Well, when we look at this, we see a common theme. Right? The common theme is sequencing of events, right? And so as we look at these series, we start to see that really our students are struggling with this one skill, and that's what we should be focusing on as we gather that information. Right? And this can be done through a teacher survey. I know a site coordinator out in Western Pennsylvania who every day stops for 5 minutes in one teacher's classroom. And eventually she works her way through all the teachers and all the grades, right? Maybe over a month, maybe over 2 months, but she stops in one teacher's classroom and just says, hey, can you tell me something your students are struggling with? Now, when she walks into her and sits at her desk, she's got a spreadsheet And she's putting all those 1 or 2 sentence answers into a spreadsheet, and that's what she's using to gather that information. So kind of low tech, right? Not a survey, but she's getting the information she needs. So I'm saying it doesn't mean you have to build out a whole big in-depth survey with 50 questions and spend a ton of time on this. I'm saying you need to get student level data, and you need to do it in a way that works for your program. So if you have teachers who are going to answer a 50-question survey, great, go for it. More data, the better, maybe. But if you don't have the ability then to analyze that data in ways that are practical, that creates an additional challenge. So build those relationships, rely on those relationships with staff, and that's a great way for that site coordinator to make those connections with the teachers in her school. So how do we turn the student level data that we're struggling with sequencing of events into a needs statement? Well, here we have an example for you. So the needs statement says students are not meeting standards on reading assessments and need assistance mastering event sequencing, right? So we have completed that one more step. We now know what the student level need is. So the question that we ask next is, how can student voice play a role? Well, hearing directly from our students can help you design these targeted interventions and hands-on activities that your students will enjoy, right? And that's what we want. We want them to enjoy. We want them to want to be there. We say often in the 21st CCLC NTAC that middle and high school students, they talk with their feet. They can walk out the door of your program if what you're offering isn't fun, engaging, and interesting, because many of them don't have to be there. They can take the bus home, they can walk home, right? They don't require supervision in the way that many elementary families count on 21st CCLC programs, even though that's not our intent, right? So we need to intentionally design activities that provide our students real-life opportunities for them to practice new skills. It's the how you engage students that makes the impact. And so I want you to think a little bit about what it's like to be a student, right? Put your I'm putting myself in my student's shoes brain on for a second. They get very little control over what they do, what they learn, what they experience during the school day. Your student has been told to do 10,000 things or more, likely, by the time they walk into the door of your 21st CCLC program if you're running after school programming. How do you think you feel? Probably frustrated and definitely exhausted, right? Not able to manage things the way you know works best for you, right? Because we know that we all manage things differently, that I like to put every single thing I need to do into my calendar, but you might be really happy to write yourself a to-do list in your notebook. Our students aren't getting those kinds of choices, right? Our after-school programs, and I'm using after school as an example, but our 21st CCLC programs, they can be different. This can be a place where we leverage student voice and choice in our programs. And so we want to be intentional about creating a space where there's policies and procedures around allowing our students to have voice and choice. And you may have just gone, wait, what? Policies and procedures around that? I hope you actually did. But we can be intentional around creating student voice and choice opportunities. But when we create policy and procedure around it, we then create a culture around it. And that culture cultivates an environment where students' thoughts, interests, passions, they matter. And that's what helps make our programs impactful. And so I want you to think about these things, right? My question to you is a yes/no question. Does your program have policies around student voice and choice? So you can grab your annotation tool, you can drop it in the chat, but this is a question for you. Does your program have policies around student voice and choice? And I guess we said yes or no, but you could say you don't know, right? Some of you are still figuring out what your program is doing. You're new in your role. So that's a fair answer too. So we've got kind of a mixed answer here, Brittany. We've got some yeses, some not sures, which is very fair, right? We're new leaders, we're new stepping into these roles, some no's. I would say to all of you as you're thinking about this, that it's important that you take time to develop policies for increasing student voice and choice to make sure it becomes part of your program culture, right? That you make sure that it's part of what you're doing regularly in your program, and it's not just like a one-time good idea, because we can all fall victim of that. We come out of a session like this and we're like, hey, we're going to do student voice and choice. I'm going to meet with the students. I'm going to hear what they want to say. And then suddenly we go to a conference in May and somebody talks about student voice and choice. And we're like, oh, I never did that thing again. When we have policies, they help us do that. Here's my next statement for you. Yes or no? Does your program collect student voice and choice data? Brittany, I see your question. I got a slide with a couple of examples on it in just a second for you. Do you collect student voice and choice data? Getting a few yeses, some no's, a lot of yeses though. Right, this one sometimes is a lot easier than the policy because it's really easy to put out a survey, find out what our kids like, what they're doing, what they're interested in. So this is a win. I'm seeing a lot of yeses. Good for you. Woo woo. Okay, here we go. One more. Do your students help plan program activities? Yes, no, not sure, because we're going to offer that as one. Seeing a little bit of a mixed answer. Maybe not as much as they should. Okay, that's a great place for growth. That's a great place to say, hey, we're going to keep doing this. And right, it's always to an extent, right? There's always places to say, yep, well, we're doing this to an extent because we're also trying to meet some goals and we need to make sure that we're aligned with those as well. And so I would encourage you just to start thinking about this in the place of, hey, we're going to do more than what we're currently doing. We said, hey, we've got some no's, we've got some unsures, we've got some yeses, do more. We want to make changes that you can implement as they get started to include student voice and choice from the beginning. So here comes my answer to some things that you can do around what a policy would look like that supports the student voice and choice. Okay, so Brittany, this one's for you. Number one, you could say, hey, we're going to have focus groups. We are going to do this on a regular schedule. We will do this on a regular basis. We are going to have predetermined subjects that we're going to talk about. And we're going to create a space for, in an objective, respectful manner, to have conversation about what our youth want in our program. That the adults, they're going to be facilitators, they're going to be note takers, they're going to ask the questions, but they're going to create space for youth to share their voice. The second is you can have a policy that says, hey, we're going to have an inquiry box or a board or some kind of space where youth can share what they're thinking and that they know somebody's going to look at it. Because the worst thing that happens is that there's a question box and nobody's opened to that question box for 12 weeks and nobody even knows what the questions, thoughts, concerns are related to, or that they're important to someone, right? And so ideally, if you have this inquiry box, facilitators review the inquiry boxes on some kind of regularly scheduled basis that you put into, here's our plan, here's our policy around this. And then you use the data to guide your content, your topic selection, because the worst thing we can do, right, is gather all this information about student voice and choice and then not apply it. Because then our youth are going to stop talking to us about it. Right. Next is student surveys, right? Do you regularly have a student survey? It's the beginning of the school year. It's a great time to say, hey, we're going to survey you about what you're interested in doing. A written series of questions that you can collate the information from and say, this is how our students perceive our program, what they're interested in. Even the background knowledge that they have on topics that you're preparing to engage in through the year, right? You can have a policy, a procedure around that that says, this is how we do this. We do this at the beginning of the year. We do it at the end of the year. It's part of our regular routine. And really, in all of these things, I've been talking very much about students, but you can do that with families too. Like include families in the capturing of voice and choice, because family voice informs, right, students. They're part of their family. The last one on this list is a guided discussion, right? It's a discussion where a facilitator chooses a general topic and it's predetermined, but you create space for a flow of conversation based on participant responses. This is a little bit different than a focus group because the focus group has a set predetermined list of questions that you're going to ask. While the guided discussion, although the facilitator is going to make sure that you don't end up in left field talking about something crazy, because we all know that our students can get there, we will guide it, but we really create space for it. It's really important if you're having that guided discussion to complete a reflection or a wrap up as a form or a way to recap this discussion and make sure that it's moving on in an effective way. And so now you've captured kind of that student voice and choice data. You've captured this information from them and you said, hey, we have a plan, a policy around how we're going to do this regularly so that it doesn't get lost in the sauce. You know, it can look like all kinds of things. I know a program that has a really strong student leadership committee, much like you would in schools where you have a student council, that they're involved in making decisions. We've had schools and programs where student groups will form for a short period of time to make a decision around something, much like we might form a working group around a decision that needs to be made in our programs, or much like we might engage a program team, right? The other way to think about this is capturing the work products that your students may want to complete, right? You may want to think about through small group or an independent projects or hands-on projects that they're interested in. And so sometimes in our programs or in activities, we decide what our students are going to make. I say, right now, we are going to write a newspaper. Instead of saying, hey, right now we're going to talk about this theme or topic, and you can find a creative way to write about that. And maybe our students really, instead of writing a newspaper, want to create a comic book or a children's book or a social media campaign, right? They want to write a TikTok or a poem or something meaningful for their community. So like informational piece that they could share with their community. But there also might be ways for them to engage in a theme or a topic through the arts, right? Through things like painting, drawing, sculpture, right? A podcast. There's all kinds of ways for students to express what they're learning and express how they're engaging in their community through the projects or the products of the work that they're doing. So we have some example student voice and choice data that we want you to look at. And so we did a survey, we did a fake survey around student interests. And we see here that this is an example of some votes collected around topics that maybe they were interested in doing. This is very casual. You might want to do something more in depth with a greater variety of questions and ways to engage their interest, because students may not always know what they're actually interested in doing until they get the chance to try it. If you're somebody who came to the 21st CCLC Summer Symposium, you may have heard some young people, some high school students talk about how they tried clubs and they thought they'd like this and they didn't, right? And their leaders encourage them to try something different. But it's about finding them some places to engage. And so we have our example votes here, and students were able to choose the top activities that they would like to see in the program. And so we're going to look at the results. Yes, thank you. And so what do our results tell us about our students? Well, we've got kind of two very different types of things that got the top votes, right? We've got dance and we've got robotics. I also am kind of noticing that like number 3 was video games. I can see a very close link between video games and robotics, right? So there's definitely some tech interest there because number 3 is AI, right? They want to know about tech. And so that gives me a lot of information to get started with. And so I'm going to take that back to my needs statement writing. So here we see that my needs statement says students want, that's what student voice needs statements sound like, is the want activities in this case, we know that they wanted activities around dance and robotics, right? That's what they want. And so now we can begin to put this all together. We can think about what activities could you develop to meet these needs? So that's my question to all of you. As you think about the data that we've seen, that we've been talking about today, what activities could you develop that meet these needs for students? We know that they need to build some writing skills, some literacy skills, especially around event sequencing. We know that they're interested in dance, that they're interested in robotics. How do we connect these things?
Hillary, I'm thinking about, sequencing applies. Yes, it is a literacy skill, but it also applies to so many of these other things that the students are interested in, right? It directly connects with dance, creating a sequence of movements, right? When it comes to tech and coding, like that is a sequence, right? Building a code to make the robot do a thing like is a sequence of steps that you have to program. And so while it might seem like, okay, robotics and dance, like that does not connect to literacy at all, you can make the connection for the students. And actually, by using things that are not necessarily right, the first kind of impression of literacy, right, and kind of coming through it at another angle can deepen that learning and understanding of sequencing, right? Because you do a sequencing event through dance and robotics, but then you come back and you tie it to some kind of application. And students will have enjoyed the process. The learning will have been deep and enriched. And then they have the opportunity to then go back and apply that to reading, to writing the story or whatever it is that that they need to do. I think it's a really great opportunity.
Brittany, I'm with you. My mind goes to all of the things related to sequencing and literacy that goes with dance, because dance typically occurs to music, and music so often has lyrics. So it's understanding the story that's told through the lyrics, right? And that's part of sequencing. It's understanding pieces like that. Many songs start with a verse, and then there's a chorus, and there's a verse, and maybe a bridge, right? And the pieces of that go with understanding the sequence of music, along with just the steps and the movements, and having them build their own sequence, right? Write their own choreography, because that's what building your own sequence is. It's writing choreography and dance, and then telling the story through it and allowing them to create that could be a really powerful way to do that. And imagine a place or a space where over time that involves writing your own song, right? With your own lyrics that has its own sequence, and writing your own choreography to go with that, right? There's so many opportunities for that. Kathy's talking about the interdisciplinary activities and programming, right? Not letting the pieces seem too separate, but instead bringing them together in creative ways. And that's really what it comes down to as you think about taking that data, using the needs to inform your program goals and what you do in your activities. And so I'm going to pass it over to Brittany, who's going to kind of continue along that through line for us.
So we've talked about the three levels of data and how we use that to inform creating needs statements. And we've started to dip our toe in what that means for planning activities, right? So we want to make sure that, yes, we've got our needs statements, but that all of this is still going to align with your program goals. And I mean, for the most part, as a 21st century program, you all share very similar goals, right? To support students, their academic success, and provide them with other opportunities to try different activities and enrichment that can just further grow them. And so you want to be able to articulate how the activities that you plan are aligning with your program goals and how your program goals are going to support the needs of the students. It's kind of this web that's all connected, right? So here's an example for you of a goal that is aligned. By the end of the program year, 50% of below grade level readers who regularly participate in the literacy activity will make gains towards grade level reading goals in fluency and decoding as measured by the school's reading level measurement system. So we have this big picture, right? Once we understand the gaps and the needs that need to be addressed, we write this program SMART goal. And I know you've heard us say SMART goal before, and you probably are familiar, but just in case you're not, SMART goals are specific, they're measurable, they're achievable, they're relevant, and they are time bound. And so SMART goals, just to make sure that we have all these pieces as part of the goal, right? It ensures that we can measure those activities for their level of success. And so in this case, every literacy activity that we're going to do in our program here is designed to meet this overall goal. So we have our data, we have our needs statement, we have our program goals, we have information about what students are interested in. How are we going to then make decisions about what we're doing for our activities and how those are going to then support the identified needs? Because you can do a dance activity, that's great, but that might take maybe a couple weeks. What are you going to do beyond that? There's going to be other activities that you need to plan. There's going to be a next thing, and it's still going to have to tie back to those program goals and supporting student needs. So it's not one activity and done. You start with one, and depending on your program, you might have multiple things happening at the same time, right? But each goal, each activity is going to have a goal of its own, right? What is the purpose of that activity? What are you hoping to achieve? And so looking at some activity types, there are so many things that we can do in that out of school time space because we are not necessarily in that box of the school day. And we have the really creative and kind of do things that provide students with unique opportunities that they would not necessarily have anywhere else. So we know 21st you have to have some kind of academic enrichment, and you have to be providing other enrichment opportunities. But there are other pieces too. We spoke about families and how important it is to also have their voice in the equation. So family engagement can look like the activities that you're building that involve both the students and their families, or bringing the families in at a culminating event of that activity, or having other things that you can plan to offer as a support to families. Perhaps it's a parent night workshop or something of that nature, right? That's going to get them engaged and in your program at some point, working alongside you and those students. Academic intervention. So we know that we have some academic goals, but an academically focused activity is designed to teach students a new skill or to help them catch up. And we might have some folks, some kiddos in our program that need a little extra academic intervention, right? They might need some tutoring. They might need additional support in a particular area separate from their peers just because of that unique need that they have that you've learned from the data that you've looked at. Academic enrichment activities are designed to allow students to practice the knowledge and skills. But in OST, we're looking at doing that in real life relevant ways, right? Doing it in such a way that it's hands-on, that it is real world application, that, it is not just that worksheet of math practice, that they are doing some math problems to solve a real world issue. It can be all kinds of things, but the most important thing is that they all should be somehow connected back to that real life and keeping it relevant for our students. We can have recreation. We've heard of so many programs that have some kind of sports element to it, or a sports team of their own, or they're bringing in other kind of physical activities for students to do. We know that fun-focused activities like this don't necessarily have to have academics integrated, and that's okay. You want to make sure you have a variety of things, but how cool would it be if like somehow you connected basketball back to that math lesson? There's a way to do it. And kids they gotta move, they love sports. It's not for everybody, and that's okay. But get them moving, providing them that recreation opportunity, right? For our older youth, when we're thinking about even as young as middle school, we want to make sure that we're having some conversations around what comes next: college, career, what's on the next side of their secondary education, right? So thinking about activities on knowledge or skills specifically pertinent to that higher education or profession. And this can also connect back with family engagement, helping folks understand the FAFSA and what they need to do, or building some life skills, or writing that college essay, or there's so many other things. And I also want to note that, sometimes college is not for everyone, and that's okay. Opening up that door to what else is out there, like training programs where they can learn a trade and get certified, that is just as relevant. We also focus on health and nutrition. And so doing activities where we're building on good health and understanding what that means, what good nutrition is, and how that affects our body. But it also looks like, what is wellness and what is self-care? We've talked so much about self-care nowadays, but really understanding what that means. Like, how do you set boundaries for yourself? How do you make sure that you are taking the time that you need to be well? And that might look like bringing in an activity such as yoga, but it also might be just having conversations on how you're feeling and how you're dealing with, stress and things like that can also support wellness. Of course, technology. We know that this is something that is nearly unavoidable. We don't want to avoid it, but it is everywhere. It's seeped into everything, and AI is the hot topic of the day. Every kid seems to have a cell phone. Most schools, especially, following the COVID-19 pandemic, right? You have devices that you have access to. That's a lot of schools have, like one-to-one student to device. You may not, and that's also okay, but how are you incorporating technology into your program? And I mentioned, an idea of how like coding connects to sequencing, and there's really wonderful tools out there that you can bring into your programs that are going to excite and engage students, and also provide them with skill sets that they can use in the future. both on a personal level, but also on a professional level, right? Learning coding is extremely valuable nowadays and can open many, many doors following their secondary education. Um, so when we think about all these different activities, there's just so much that you can do, right? But we want to make sure that we are building SMART goals that are going to support these activities and that they are intentional, right? We just don't want to do activities for activity's sake. It is, yes, an element, especially for our elementary families, of aftercare, but 21st century programs are so much more. And when we are intentional about setting goals to support all of these various activities that we could be doing in our programs, we are setting up the precedent that this means more, that the students that participate are going to learn and grow and develop and is going to impact their success in their school day settings, right? And this is an important thing to make sure that we're articulating to our students and families so that they understand that there is an expectation that we're going to do these activities. And you're going to have a say in what we do, but we're going to have this goal that we're working towards so that we can be better. So when we think about all of these components, right, it's a lot to think about. Research shows us that high quality out of school time programs include essentially 4 components. And those are that the program activities connect to the school day learning objectives and to the needs of our students. The program engages students and it employs positive youth development. And if you're not familiar with that term, we'll highlight a little bit about that for you. But you can find lots of information. Check out the NTAC website, check out online resources around positive youth development. But essentially there are, there's 5 things we think about with positive youth and development and what the environment looks like, right? Competence. It means that we have a positive view of actions. It is confidence, that feeling or that sense of success. Connection. It's when we're developing those positive connections with students, with family members, with other students, with peers, with school leaders, with the community at large, really connection to everything and everyone, right? It's character. So that respect for societal and cultural rules or standards of behavior, respect for our differences. And it's also caring. It's showing that empathy and showing compassion for others. These are the components of positive youth development. And OST plays an especially important role in providing positive youth development environment because through everything that we do, we're working to promote resiliency in our students. We probably have heard this term about 21st century skills. That is, directly connected to our 21st century programs, right? In that the programs that we run prepare students with this skill set of 21st century skills and in the real world, right? So including these skills helps students support their students' needs to be successful whenever they enter the real world. And it can be things like communication. We are thinking about how are we communicating and effectively communicating. What does that look like? And how increasingly important this is nowadays. Whenever, especially, I think about cell phones, and I've heard program people talk about like kids just being sucked into their phones. How can we break that and encourage them to explore communication in a really impactful way, right? How, instead of just being isolated in their own little bubble. It's collaboration, right? Working together. Sometimes easier said than done, but it's certainly a skill set that they are going to need no matter where they go in life. We have to be able to understand how to work with other people, even if we have some differences or even if we disagree, right? There's still that need for collaboration. Create a critical thinking. So critical thinking is something that it's really a hard skill to teach, right? But whenever we are allowing students to explore and supporting their problem solving skills and the activities that we do, and we're pushing them to think outside of the box and asking those questions that get them to kind of dig deeper and try to figure out, well, what is my answer to this question, right? It starts to build that critical thinking that's going to be incredibly valuable to them all life long. And then, of course, we have creativity is the last piece. Creativity does not necessarily mean that it is artistic. It doesn't necessarily mean that it fits into this one artistic box, right? We can be creative in so many other ways. And oddly enough, it also connects back to all the other things too, right? How can we be exercising creativity in our problem solving and in our collaboration and in our communication? So there's 4 alignment strategies for you to think about to help integrate the components of quality components into your 21st century programs. So we talked a lot about positive youth development in 21st century, but really it boils down to these 4 alignment strategies that we've connected student need to student voice, that we're using positive youth development and supporting 21st century skills, and that we are using different learning methods for students to be able to learn in different ways. And we're going to dive into that. We're going to dive into that now. So learning strategies and methods, especially in OST, look a little different than the school day. So an important component of the high quality programming is engaging students in program activities and the learning process. You want your students to truly enjoy your program experience. It'll keep them coming back, and it will also eliminate retention issues. So you won't have students that just kind of stop coming, right? If they're wanting to be there and they're being engaged. You also want them to be enthusiastic about the activities they're participating in, and they will be if you are using that student voice to build the activities that you're doing in your program. And a completely engaged student will be at your program every day. They will be eager to jump in. They'll be willing to try new things, and they'll feel like they're just part of this bigger community. And so we know that students should enjoy that activity. They should exhibit enthusiasm in learning, but your staff should employ appropriate learning methods and strategies so that things are being student-centered, that they are developmentally appropriate for your age group, and they're inquiry-based. So let's better understand what these things mean for our staff. Student-centered means that once you have all these activities that you are mapping out and you're using them to help students master new knowledge and new skills, it's also important to think about how we are delivering these activities. And so as we select these different delivery strategies and learning methods for our activities, we want to keep students at the center. We want them to be part of the decision-making process and leading that learning. And that can be a little uncomfortable at times. That's okay, but it's one of the things that makes OST so special, that students through these activities are having that opportunity to explore and try new things and figure things out while you are still there, you're still involved, but you're more like a guide on the side. So when we as facilitators act as the guide on the side, This is when we act as kind of just that coach in the background, right? We change up the construction to have students lead the learning themselves, while we are here in the back kind of helping them along the way. In doing that, we allow our student participants to choose their own focus. It opens up the door for making mistakes, which is okay. And we have the opportunity to support them as they make those mistakes. It also can help them with evaluating learning and us to evaluate their learning as it's going. And then we can change direction if we need to, right? Based on what we see, or students might learn that, hey, I need to pivot in order to do X, Y, or Z. So the role of you, the facilitator, is, like I said, to guide students questioning and thinking. You guide on the side allows you to place students at the center of that learning like we want it to be. And this process and the accompanying structures are what allow for interactions. These interactions then build up over time into relationships. And that's what we want. We want positive relationships between students and students and students and staff. And so you, as the guide on the side, you put the driving in the control of the students to a degree. And you are there to support, but they are responsible for their learning. So, like I said, this might be uncomfortable. You might be a whiz at this, but think about yourself for a second, and tell us, where do you fall on this kind of scale of 1 to 10? Where is your comfort level? Are you more comfortable with facilitator-led activities or student-led activities? So take your annotation tool and let us know. Is it more facilitator-led on your more on the 1, maybe you're 2 or 3 or 4, right? Maybe you're somewhere in the middle and you're like, okay, I can kind of do this. I'm a little comfortable. Maybe you're 5 or 10. Like, this is how I live and breathe. This is how my programs run. Okay, I see some people chiming in. Yes. All right, so we've got some folks in the middle, and that's okay. This is hard stuff, right? Letting go of that control, not easy. And we have some folks who are like, yes, 10 all the way, absolutely. I love that for you. And I would love, if there's anything that kind of like helped you become more comfortable, drop it in the chat for us to learn. Hillary, what about you when you're running programs?
I definitely fall in like well, I'll say this. It depends on my relationship with the students, because it's really hard to walk in and not have existing relationships with students and then kind of let them lead, right? But as you build those relationships, I definitely can move to that 8, 9. I'm not really good at just being like, whatever happens, happens. And there's people who have that skill set. I like still want to make sure they're moving forward and like actually accomplishing the things that I want them to. But when you don't have those existing relationships, at least for me, I tend to be much more like, I can let you make choices. You can choose this or that, or you can decide how, but I'm going to say the what. And right, so that's more that 3, 4, 5 kind of end for me, because I don't know what's going to come out of those students who I don't have strong relationships with.
And I'm so glad that you said that, Hillary, because it really is a process, right? You don't start day 1 being like, okay, kids, do the thing. Right? You're going to have to set up some parameters, some protocols. You're going to have to set the tone. You're going to have to set the expectations. So it is a bit of a process. But really, it's a culture that you're developing when you do this, right? And that's where we start to see learning really blossom. Whenever you're able to build that healthy culture and relationships with your students and be able to comfortably move into that place of student-led. So keep thinking about it, folks. Drop it in the chat if you have any ideas or things around how you might incorporate more student-led learning into your program. But when we reflect on our practice, it provides us a background to work towards being more student-centered, right? Thinking about what have we done, what have we seen, what have we tried and not worked or did work, and we can use all of that while still using student voice and choice. Now, I mentioned learning methods. There's 4 learning methods that we think about in the OST space. And so those are blended learning, project-based learning, service learning, and theme-based learning. And all of these are really great ways to make sure that your activities are authentic and real world and supporting that student goals that we've set for our activities, right? So blended learning is whenever you take, you blend the content with the facilitator and student guided pacing. So it's both, right? And it can look, it can be as, simple or complex as you want it to be. Blended learning can be, a rotation of multiple activities where there's some things that our students are doing on their own and some things are happening with a facilitator guiding their learning. There's project-based learning, which we hear all the time in OST settings, right? Project-based learning is whenever we are encouraging collaboration in open-ended projects of interest or need. So for example, I saw a program where they were doing there was this theme of like gardening, and they were working on some math skills with area and perimeter, as well as money. And so students had to figure out the cost of the materials for their garden, and they had to plot out their gardens if they would have enough space for all their vegetables. And they actually planted a garden. There's so much potential there. You could take it so far beyond just that I've created a garden for my program. Like, invite the families in. What if it became a community garden? What if you partnered with a local like garden center, or maybe there's a horticulture organization in the area that might be interested in coming and working with your students on the different, the science behind the plants, right? Like what makes those veggies. And I love Hillary's suggestion, right? You can always turn around and then sell the vegetables. Or what if you made it a donation to, a homeless shelter or something where there's a need? All really great ways that you can take that learning experience where they're practicing those math skills, but doing it in a real world way, and it be kind of in this project format. There's service learning, where we focus on experiential opportunities that link learning to service, such as volunteering. That can look like a lot of different things, right? And I even think there's that connection in my example, right, to the project-based learning, where if you're then taking those vegetables from that vegetable garden and donating them, that is tying in now service learning as well. And there's theme-based approaches. So it's where we take a central theme or interest and input from your team. This is where, the students say, I'm really interested in Marvel, and you design something that's superhero-y, right? There's a very specific theme that you're tying in the activities to. So where does this fall on our data through line, right? We've done so much work. We've got our activity goals. But what happens next? Well, we're going to finalize everything, and we're going to start to implement what we're going to do. So this looks like, here's an example for you, right? We know that students need help with decoding and fluency. And so the possible activity that we have is that students will move through 4 literacy centers that focus on high need reading skills. And this is a great example of what blended learning could look like. Online learning program is an activity. Small group literacy game is another. An independent practice activity. And then there it is, the facilitator-led one-on-one or small group instruction. And this is, like I said, a great example of blended learning because you have all these things happening and you could have students rotating through all these different activities. And the key being that there is at least one of these where there's a facilitator supporting the students in that process. So what does the goal then look like for this? By the end of the program year, 50% of below grade level readers who regularly participate in reading graders will make gains towards grade level reading goals in fluency and decoding as measured by the school's reading level measurement system. We know that this goal is a SMART goal because it is very specific and telling us that it's going to be specifically those students who are below grade level in reading, but that they also are regularly participating, right? It's measurable. We are going to be using the school's reading level measurement system, and our overall goal is that there's going to be 50% of those participating students that are going to achieve that goal. So it is attainable. We also know that it's relevant because from our student voice information, we know that the things that the students are interested in are going to be incorporated into all the activities that are going to support this goal. And it's time bound because they have said that it's going to be achieved by the end of the program year. And so we have a SMART goal that specifically supports the activity. You're going to have lots of SMART goals. And that's exactly what we need to ensure that we're being holding ourselves accountable to the work that needs to be done, and setting an expectation for ourselves of the purpose of everything, right? So that it's not just an activity for an activity's sake, that it's very intentional. We have all these pieces and we get to the point where we're ready to continue this data line. Yes, we're going to have student recruitment. That is going to be happening. And they're going to participate in these activities and it's going to be great. And they're going to excel and they're going to grow. But you know what? This data through line does not end on this screen, right? There is always going to be the next point of collecting the data. This looks like at the end of that activity, some kind of measuring tool for how impactful was that activity and did it move that needle the way it needed to. You're going to continue to collect data all school year long. You might do needs assessments throughout the year or new surveys or moments where you're checking the schools and seeing, okay, after this big unit was finished, what were the results and who needs help and how can we support in that way? It is an ongoing process. Data is kind of like the life in the 21st century in a way, right? We're constantly collecting and analyzing and using the data to inform the things that come next for us. So we hope that the things that we've chatted about today have helped you begin to think about how you're going to be building these activities, how you're going to be setting these goals, and how it is all going to connect back directly to the needs of the students in your program. And while after these 3 days, it probably is still feeling like a lot, and that's okay. It's going to feel like a lot. Hopefully some of these things will help you to have a little bit of an easier start to all these processes. But if you are looking for some help along the way, we want to encourage you to join our community of practice. And it is going to be a place where people just like you, as well as our NTAC team, can support you with whatever questions or curiosities you might have, or if you're looking for new ideas. It's just a place where we can come together and support one another. We're also in just a moment going to share with you the NTAC resources available to you. But before that, how are you feeling? We did this check-in at the beginning, but let's check out. How are you feeling? Chime in for us, either in the chat if you want to use an annotation tool and show us on the screen, We invite you to place a word in that chat box, even if it's not one of these that you see. How are you checking out of this session today? Okay. Happy. Oh, I love it, Kenyetta. Little heart face. Excited. Some people are excited. That's great. I'm excited too. I'm excited for y'all. It's a lot of information, but excited. Yeah, absolutely. Hopeful. Great. I love it. So hopefully, you've thought a little bit about this activity since when we started with it. You can also use these as checkouts at the end of your day, um, regardless of how the day has gone, right? It could be a great day, it could be a bad day, it could be neutral. You can use either a check-in or a checkout as that temperature check with your students, with your teams. I don't want to discount that either. There were some folks at the beginning who shared recommendations of doing this with staff. How incredibly valuable it can be for your team, for your staff, to do check-ins and check-outs, especially if maybe it's been a hard day. Maybe you're going through a season where, like, the full moon is out and the kids are going bonkers, right? We know that can happen. um, Doing a check-in or check-out is a great way to better build those relationships with your students and your staff. And so we recommend that you think about a little bit how you can begin to incorporate check-ins or check-outs or both into your program. And if you have any ideas, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. I also want to mention, thank you, Hillary, that if you could please fill out our feedback form. We take our feedback to heart and build content to directly support the needs that are shared. And also, it helps us know if what you learned today it was relevant to you, which is very important as we continue to build out resources to support people just like you. So I'm going to clear our screen here and hop over to the website. And Hillary's going to tell us a little bit more about the resources that are available through NTAC.
Absolutely. So if you have not been to 21stcclcntac.org yet, we encourage you to go visit the website. We believe that there's a lot of resources for you, for your teams that are available here. So if you scroll down on our homepage, one of the things that we do want to point out to you is that you can see upcoming webinars. And so be on the lookout. But I want to point out that on August 28th is office hours. So if you walk out of these 3 days, you start doing some of this work, and then you run into questions, or you have questions unrelated to any of the topics we've talked about so far, but you want to ask us about questions related to 21st CCLC NTAC, you can sign up, come in, and get your questions answered. That's what they're there for. You don't have to be afraid. No question is too dumb for office hours, because if it's a question, that means probably someone else is asking the same thing. The other thing I'll point out is our huddles are 30 minutes quick grab and go. So on August 20th, we'll be talking about CASEL and their OST toolkit. So resources around understanding social emotional learning for your students. So if that's a term or something you're not super familiar with, or you just want to get a quick download of what's out there related to social emotional learning, this is one way to do that. The other things that I'd like to point out, if you go back to the top of our page of our website, you will be able to see a little bit about some of our resources. So as we jump to our resources, the first thing is that you're going to see we have a professional learning portal. And if you go and access that, you can see first our capacity building courses. So the first one that we have is on learning recovery. There are a variety of pieces and parts. You can take it as a complete course and get a certificate at the end, or you can just check into one or two sections that you're interested in and have some more questions about. Then if you continue down, you'll see some of our mini courses. So we have one on becoming a leader, And there's one on guiding positive behavior. So if you're looking for something that you can grab in about an hour, hour and a half, and learn about that topic, this is a great way to do that. It has questions to engage in, and of course, a certificate of completion will be provided. So it's also a great thing to assign your staff if you're looking for some resources for them around. Continuing down, we have micro learnings. These are more podcast style information bites that you can do in less than about 15 minutes on a variety of topics, including trauma-informed care, mandated reporting, the neuroscience behind student trauma. Really interesting bites that you can use. You can put them on while you're driving in the car, while you're taking a walk, whatever the way is that you like to grab and consume information, because these are real quick bites for that. And then the last thing, the second to last thing, I apologize. The second to last thing that we have are these toolkits. These are the resources that you're looking for. So if you're like, okay, I now have all of this information in my head, but I need like the form, the tool to actually do it, this is where some of them are. So one of the ones that you may be thinking about right now is learning recovery. Like, how do I actually get from my students are in my program and I know what they're interested in, to helping them recover the gaps that occurred during COVID-19 and make that academic progress. There's really practical tools around STEM, around literacy in this toolkit, and SEL. There's also toolkits related to the the mini courses. So you'll see the one around becoming a right leader, around guiding positive student behavior. And so, yes, you took the becoming a leader course, you took the guiding positive student behavior, but now you need the resource to go with it. That's where these tools, you can find them. Training kits, I often say, and you may have already heard me say, that the training kits are my favorite, right? Because as a leader, you're going to be looking for resources to train your staff, to train your programs, to train whoever it is that you oversee. These training modules include the PowerPoints, all the activities, the talking points. You can edit and use them in a way that fits you and your program best. And so they're a great resource. And we are continuing to populate and update all of these resources and add more content every month. So keep your eye out for new resources that are coming. The best way to do this, if you go back to the top of our page, is to connect with us. So I highly, highly, highly recommend that you sign up for our newsletter. I believe that this is the number way to stay connected and informed with what we're doing. We will not spam you. Our NTAC newsletter, the NTAC Messenger, comes once a month. And it'll tell you upcoming webinars that you can join. It will tell you new tools, resources, courses, etc. that are on the website. It will share with you stories from the field, who's doing what work, where, and how it's working. It's a great way to connect and engage with the information that the NTAC is putting out. Of course, the second way that I'd encourage you to engage is through putting in a technical assistance request. You can request support. If you're a state level leader, you can request support from your senior TA liaison. And if you're a program level leader, you can request support from your TA liaison. Our role is to give you the resources that you need. And so you can fill in that request, tell us what kind of support you're looking for, and then state level leaders will reach out and meet with you and talk about that support. If you're a front level staff, we will have to check in with your state level leader first, and then we're going to provide you support. We can come to your program, we can speak at your conference, we can do training during your training weeks or days, right? Ask for support and training and resources, because we want to provide that for you and make sure that you have everything that you need to be successful at your programs. So please reach out and ask for us. I do want to point out just a few other things though. So if we go back to the top of the page and we go back to our resources, I want to note that there is more there than just the professional learning library. Yes, there are the archived resources. So Here you can see, if you're familiar with Y4Y or U4Youth, there's a Y4Y archives. There are so many resources there that you can grab that are already there. But I also want to point out the archived events, because this is where you're going to find the content. If you missed one of the days, if you're looking for the recording, if you're looking to see where the slides are, all of that is available on the archived events. You do need to give us a couple of weeks to get these sessions up there, but they will be there. And in the meantime, you can check out the things that we've already archived that are there. So Brittany was just looking at a couple of the lives. Lives are a wonderful opportunity for you to engage and hear from practitioners who are working in the field. We interview them, we ask them about their best practices around topics like inclusion or multilingual learners. Upcoming are live in the month of August is going to be on sustainability. What a hot topic. Okay, then you'll see our archived huddles. I already said for you today, 30 minutes, grab and go resources that you can use on a variety of topics, from trauma-informed care to completing the FAFSA to STEAM to literacy, right? Just quick downloads of resources and tools. They're not meant to give you a ton of information, but so you know what's available where. As you continue, you can also see some of our webinars that we've done. So we did a deep dive webinar series on servant leadership. There are 10 parts covering the 10 pillars of what it means to be a servant leader. If you are someone who hasn't been in a leadership role and that's part of what you're stepping into, I highly recommend this series. It's really designed to be a place for reflection and not necessarily all the answers, but to think about what you're doing as a leader and what you can do to make a better impact on your staff and on your students. We also have recorded the office hours. So if you know that you signed up and you left a question when you signed up for an office hours, but you didn't actually join on the day of the office hours, you can go back and see what we answered to your question. And then the last set of things that you have here are some of our other series. So we did a restorative practices series on guiding positive student behavior. There are 3 parts to that. So if you want to know more about how to do a restorative circle and how to address behaviors that you're seeing in your program, this might be a good starting place for you. But of course, the TA request form can help you go that next step. So if you're still struggling, if you've used some of the resources that we offer on a wide variety of things, we'd encourage you to. Thank you, Dave, for dropping the link for that live that I just mentioned on building sustainable programs in the chat box. And so we want to make sure that before we wrap up the series, that we give you a chance to join one more time our new leaders community of practice. So I'm also dropping the link for that in there one more time, that we encourage you to sign up for our newsletter, which I've already said today, that we encourage you to follow us on X or LinkedIn, that you complete the feedback form, and that we answer your questions. So if you've got pressing questions, we want to answer them now. We don't want to leave you hanging. And so we're trying to leave just a couple of minutes for that, but please ask your questions and stay connected. Brittany and I love to get messages. The best way you can do that is email us at info@21stcclcntac.org. And so we love to hear from all of you about the things that you're celebrating, your wins, because sometimes we feel like we don't get to hear enough of those. So if you've got something great that you're excited about, email us. And if you've got a challenge you're facing, fill out a TA request or send us an email. We'd love to talk to you more about that and how we can help support you in that process. You've consumed a lot of information over these last 3 days. We know, and we know it's a lot to consume, but we'd encourage you, when you get to the spot where you're doing these things and you're trying to figure out how, that you come back to us for tools, because we have a lot of tools available to help you with it that I personally think would have helped me when I was a new program leader. And instead I was figuring a lot of this out as I went. And then suddenly there was the deadline where I was supposed to submit the data, or somebody was asking me for a report or this or that. And I was surprised by it. And we'd encourage you to do this planning work so that you're not surprised by it. Follow the data through line so you stay connected with the heart of what you're doing, which is making a difference for the young people in our nation who are most at risk and most in need. And so that's what I would encourage you for. I'm glad that so many of you are hopeful because I am hopeful for it too when I see new leaders stepping into the work of 21st CCLC programs, really designed to make a difference for our young people. Brittany, I think we're just about there, and I haven't seen any questions pop up. I think I answered any that came through in the chat. But it's been a pleasure to work on this series with you and talk to this group. Thank you all for being so engaged. You've been wonderful.
I second all of that. And I just wanted to provide one clarifying point. So Andre asked about if the slides would be shared. So make sure that you check out the archive resources where everything will be posted, but it takes us a little bit of time to turn all that around. So two weeks, this should be up on the website.